The forest had always kept its secrets, but none more tragic than the scene Ethan discovered that autumn morning. The mother bear stood silent in the clearing, her powerful frame trembling as she nudged the lifeless bodies of her cubs. The air hung heavy with sorrow. Something inside Ethan broke, not from fear, but from recognition. He had buried his own child 2 years ago. Now, face to face with a creature torn apart by the same unbearable loss, he did something unthinkable. He stepped forward. She didn't run. She didn't growl. She simply looked at him. And in that look, something passed between them. Pain. Recognition. A strange, fragile trust. That was the day Ethan's life changed forever. Because from that moment on, the grieving bear didn't return to the wild. She stayed. And in time, both broken souls would begin to heal, together. Ethan Reed hadn't spoken to another person in months. He'd moved to the cabin after the accident. Left behind the city, his job, and what was left of his marriage. Out here, miles from anyone, surrounded by pine and silence, he could breathe, or at least pretend to. Most mornings began the same. Coffee on the front porch, his old golden retriever, Scout, at his feet. Then a long walk into the woods, past the ridge and down to the river. He knew every bird call, every broken branch. Solitude had become not just comfort, it was survival. But this morning was different. Scout growled low as they approached the ravine. Not the playful bark of spotting a squirrel, but a warning. Ethan slowed his steps. Around the bend, the scent hit him first, coppery and sharp. Blood. Then he saw her. A massive female grizzly, standing in a small clearing, motionless. At her feet lay 2 cubs, still broken. Ethan froze. His breath caught. He knew not to approach a grieving mother. Even healthy ones were unpredictable, and this one had just lost her world. But she didn't roar. Didn't charge. She nudged one cub, gently, then the other. When they didn't move, she gave a sound Ethan would never forget, a guttural, aching moan, low and human-like in its pain. Scout whined softly behind him. Ethan stepped forward. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. And she looked up. Not with fury. Not even with fear. But with eyes Ethan had only seen in the mirror. Ethan backed away slowly, never turning his back on the bear. He wasn't foolish. He'd spent enough time in the wild to know that bears in grief could be just as unpredictable as bears in rage. But even as he stepped away, something in him was pulled toward her. The look in her eyes, hollow, yet full of something deeper, wasn't something he could forget. He returned to the cabin in silence. Scout kept glancing back, ears flat. That night, Ethan barely slept. The image of the bear mourning her cubs haunted him. The next morning, he did something he told himself was just curiosity. He returned. She was still there. She hadn't moved from the clearing. The cubs were still beside her, their bodies undisturbed. She lay beside them now, her massive head resting on her paw. As Ethan stood at the edge of the clearing, he realized something. She had no will to go on. She hadn't eaten, hadn't moved much. She was grieving herself into death. And Ethan knew that kind of pain all too well. 2 years ago, his daughter Emma had died in a car crash. 9 years old, full of laughter and stories. Gone in a second. He had been driving. The guilt consumed him. His wife, Lila, tried to forgive, but Ethan couldn't forgive himself. Their marriage dissolved under the weight of silence and blame. When the divorce papers were signed, Ethan took Scout and left. He hadn't looked back since. But now, looking at this bear, this giant creature somehow made fragile by grief, something stirred inside him. He couldn't save Emma. But maybe. He stepped forward again. Not too close. Just enough to speak. "You don't have to die," he said gently. "You don't." The bear didn't react. But she didn't leave either. Over the next 3 days, Ethan returned. He brought food, leftover fish, apples, whatever he could spare. He always left it a good distance away. The bear, whom he began calling Wren, didn't eat at first. But on the 4th day, she sniffed the air, rose slowly, and limped toward the pile. She ate. And Ethan cried. He didn't know why, not exactly. Maybe it was the act of choosing life. Maybe it was because he hadn't spoken to anyone, not even God, in over a year, and now he found himself talking to a bear every morning. "I know you're not mine to save," he said softly one afternoon, as Wren drank from the river. "But you're the only one who understands." Wren turned to look at him, really look. Then she sat back and began grooming her shoulder. Ethan smiled. It was the first time in a long time he felt something other than emptiness. Autumn deepened. The trees exploded with color, fire orange, deep crimson, golden yellow. The nights grew colder. Wren moved closer to Ethan's cabin. She began sleeping just outside the treeline, her breaths like the rhythm of the earth itself. Scout kept his distance but no longer growled. One evening, as a cold rain moved in, Ethan found Wren lying near the woodpile, soaked and shivering. She was strong, but grief had weakened her. She didn't have the reserves to hibernate. Without thinking, Ethan opened the barn behind his cabin and laid down a tarp and straw. "You can stay here," he said. "Just for the night." Wren hesitated, then limped inside. She curled up in the corner, eyes half closed. Ethan stood at the door, watching her for a long time. Scout sat beside him, tail thumping quietly. "I guess we've got company," Ethan whispered. That night, for the first time in years, he dreamed of laughter, Emma's laughter. Wren made the barn her home. Each night, after wandering the woods nearby, she'd return just before dusk, lumbering through the trees with slow, deliberate steps. Scout grew used to her presence. He still gave her space, but no longer barked. Sometimes, Ethan caught Scout sitting by the barn door, listening to the soft huffs and sighs Wren made as she settled in. Ethan added old quilts, fixed up the barn roof, and hung a lantern just inside the door. "She's family now," he told Scout. It sounded ridiculous, but it felt true. One evening, as snow threatened the edge of the sky, Ethan sat just outside the barn, carving wood. His hands moved automatically, a habit from his ranger days. He hadn't realized until that night what he was carving. A small cub. He stared at the half-finished carving, heart aching. Inside the barn, Wren shifted and let out a low rumbling breath. They were both dreaming of someone they'd lost. Winter came early and heavy. Stillwater Ridge was cut off from the main roads by December. But Ethan didn't mind. He had supplies, firewood, and a routine. Each morning, he checked the traps, humane for rabbits and raccoons, fed Scout, and brought Wren fresh water and whatever food he could spare. One morning, as he was splitting logs, he heard tires on the icy path. A truck. That hadn't happened in months. The vehicle came into view, Forest Service green. Out stepped Mason, an old friend and former colleague. "Still out here, huh?" Mason said, brushing snow off his shoulders. "Always," Ethan replied. "What's up?" Mason hesitated, then got to the point. "There's been reports. A big bear, hanging near your property. Couple hunters say she's been too close to the trail." Ethan's spine tensed. "She hasn't hurt anyone." "I know. But the others, they want to trap her. Move her out. Or worse." "No," Ethan said sharply. "She's not dangerous. She's just grieving." Mason sighed. "I trust you, Ethan. But you need to be careful. People don't understand bears like you do. Especially one that doesn't act the way they expect." Ethan nodded, jaw tight. After Mason left, he went to the barn. Wren was there, watching the snowfall. He whispered, "They don't get it. But I won't let them take you." She blinked slowly, then closed her eyes again. That night, Ethan slept with a rifle near the door, not because of the bear, but because of the people. It happened in early January. The snow was deep. The air sharp enough to freeze breath mid-sentence. Ethan had just returned from the riverbank when he noticed something strange. Wren was pacing outside the barn, her head low, sniffing the air. "Hey," he called gently. "What is it?" She turned, then bolted into the woods. Ethan's heart dropped. He followed, carefully, slowly, Scout at his heels. 100 yards in, he saw what had triggered her. A tiny, frost-covered body in the snow, a cub. Alive, barely. No mother in sight. The little one was shivering uncontrollably, its breaths shallow. Wren stood over it, sniffing, then nudging softly. Ethan stared. Where did it come from? Maybe another mother had died. Maybe the cub had wandered too far. It didn't matter now. He stepped forward, heart thudding. The cub whimpered, trying to crawl toward Ren. Ren looked at Ethan, then back at the cub. Then she did something that stunned him. She licked it. Gently. Slowly. Like a mother. Ethan wrapped the cub in his thick scarf and carried it carefully back to the barn. Its body was fragile, limp but breathing. Ren followed close behind, her eyes never leaving the little form in his arms. Inside the barn he cleared a corner, laid down extra blankets, and set the cub gently onto a pillow of straw. Ren hovered protectively, snorting softly as Ethan wiped the frost from the cub's nose and mouth. He lit the lantern and warmed a bottle of goat's milk over the small wood stove he had installed in the corner for Ren. Scout paced nervously outside the barn door. "This is insane," Ethan muttered, shaking the bottle. "But maybe it's not." The cub whimpered weakly. Ren let out a low moan, lowering her massive body beside it. She curled her paws gently around the tiny bear, pulling it close to her chest. The cub let out a soft, helpless cry, and nestled into her warmth. Ethan exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. This cub had no mother. And Ren, who had lost hers, had chosen to mother again. The days that followed were quiet but sacred. Ethan fed the cub warm milk 3 times a day, watched as Ren licked its fur clean, and listened as it grew stronger. It began to move on its own, clumsily waddling around the barn, chewing on wood, sneezing at the smell of hay. Scout watched from a distance, occasionally wagging his tail when the cub rolled over in the straw. Ethan gave the cub a name, Ash, for its dark fur and the place from which it had risen, like something reborn from the cold ashes of winter. Ren was never far from Ash's side. She licked him clean after every nap, growled softly when he cried, and once even placed her own body between him and a sharp draft that had snuck through the barn door. Ethan couldn't explain it, not in any scientific or rational way, but Ren had adopted this orphan as her own. And somehow, Ethan had become part of it too. It was nearly February when the silence broke. Ethan was collecting firewood near the ridge when Scout let out a sharp bark. A man stood at the edge of the tree line, rifle over his shoulder, bright orange vest, and binoculars hanging from his neck. Ethan stepped between him and the barn. "Trail ends a half-mile back," he said calmly. The man tilted his head. "Heard a report of a big grizzly in the area. Figured I'd take a look." Ethan didn't move. "There's no bear here." The hunter smiled thinly. "You sure? Got tracks near your cabin." "Old ones." The man took a step forward. "You seen any cubs?" Ethan's voice hardened. "No." The man lingered, then shrugged and turned away. But Ethan knew the word was out. And it wasn't just Ren at risk now. It was Ash. That night, Ethan sat by the stove, map spread across his lap. He couldn't stay. Ren and Ash wouldn't be safe here much longer. Not with hunters roaming so close and rumors spreading. There was a wildlife rehabilitation center up north, one he'd worked with during his ranger days. Remote. Private. Protected. They specialized in reintroducing orphaned animals into protected reserves. It would be a long trip. Dangerous. But maybe a real chance for Ash. And for Ren too. If she'd let him. Ethan looked out the window toward the barn, where Ren and Ash lay curled together under the flickering lantern light. "Maybe it's time," he whispered. He started packing at dawn. Ethan worked quickly but carefully. The weather was expected to hold for 2 more days, a narrow window to make the journey north before another snow system swept in. He reinforced the back of his truck with plywood and hay, converting it into a temporary den. He added a layer of insulation and secured crates of supplies. It wasn't elegant, but it would be warm. Safe. Convincing Ren, however, was another matter. She watched warily as Ethan approached the barn with a rope and a harness, not for her but for Ash. She growled low, stepping between them. Ethan held up his hands. "Easy. I'm not taking him from you." He set the harness down and backed away. Over the next day, he spent more time with them in the barn, sitting, reading aloud, feeding Ash by hand. Slowly, Ren calmed. She let him touch Ash again, let him carry the cub to the truck and back. On the second night, Ren climbed into the back of the truck on her own. Scout barked in surprise. Ethan stood still. Ren sniffed the hay, circled once, then lay down. Ash clambered up beside her, curling into the hollow of her chest. The journey could begin. Ethan drove before dawn. The forest rolled past in white silence as the truck bumped down the old service road, headlights cutting through the fog. Ren rode quietly in the back, occasionally shifting. Ash peeked out from beneath the tarp, his round face blinking sleepily at the early light. Scout sat in the front seat, ears alert. The drive was long, 12 hours across winding mountain roads, snowblown passes, and deserted highways. They stopped only once, at an abandoned ranger post, where Ethan gave Ren water and stretched his legs. Ash chased snowflakes briefly before Ren herded him back into the truck. As they neared the sanctuary, Ethan felt a tightening in his chest. This was the right choice. The safe one. But it still felt like losing something, again. The center was nestled at the foot of a forested valley, tall fencing, warm lodges, and miles of protected land beyond. It wasn't a zoo. It wasn't a cage. It was a second chance. Dr. Elise Carver, the sanctuary's director, met Ethan at the gate. "You actually did it," she said softly, looking past him to the figures in the truck bed. "She let you bring them." "She chose to," Ethan replied. "That cub, he saved her life. And she saved mine." Elise nodded. "We've got a heated enclosure ready. She'll be safe here. Both of them." Ren stepped from the truck slowly, eyeing the staff but not panicking. Ash stuck close to her leg, sniffing everything. Scout wagged his tail, watching them from beside Ethan. "She's different," Elise murmured. "Most bears don't mourn this way. And they certainly don't trust humans." Ethan looked at Ren as she nudged Ash toward a bed of pine straw in the enclosure. "She's been through what we've been through." Ethan stayed at the sanctuary for 3 days, sleeping in the guest bunkhouse and visiting the enclosure each morning. Ren would greet him quietly. Ash, on the other hand, would tumble toward him with a squeaky bark-like sound, rubbing up against Ethan's legs like a playful dog. On the third morning, as snow began to fall again, Ethan approached with a heavy heart. "It's time, buddy," he said softly to Ash. "You've got a home now. A big one." He looked at Ren, her massive head tilted slightly. "You saved each other. Now, let the forest save you." He turned to go. Ash cried out, a small sharp sound. Ethan turned back, dropped to one knee, and held out his arms. Ash rushed forward, wrapping his tiny paws around Ethan's chest. It wasn't human. But it was a hug. And it broke Ethan's heart in the most beautiful way. Ren let out a low chuff, a sound like a blessing. The drive back felt longer. Ethan didn't cry. Not exactly. But his chest ached in a way he hadn't felt since Emma died, not from grief, but from the quiet ache of letting go of something precious. Scout lay with his head on Ethan's lap the whole way home. The cabin stood quiet in the snow. The barn was empty, and it echoed when Ethan stepped inside. He left the old blanket Ren had once slept on untouched. Ash's tiny chew marks were still visible on the base of the wood paneling. Ethan sat in the barn that evening. Not to mourn, but to remember. "You saved me too," he whispered. Weeks passed. Then months. Spring came slowly, as it always did in the mountains. Ethan went back to clearing trails for the Park Service part-time. He repaired cabins, helped tourists navigate the woods, and smiled more than he used to. And then one day, a letter. It came from Dr. Elise Carver. "Ren and Ash are thriving. Ash is growing fast, already climbing trees and splashing in the streams. We introduced another orphan cub a month ago, and Ren has adopted her as well. She's become a matriarch. Calm, strong, fiercely protective. I've never seen anything like it. Ash still runs to the gate every morning. We think he's waiting for you." Ethan pressed the letter to his chest and closed his eyes. "Me too, little guy." One night, a fierce thunderstorm rolled across Stillwater Ridge. The kind that rattled windows and peeled back the night. Ethan dreamed vividly for the first time in weeks. In his dream, Ren was standing in the field behind the barn. But she wasn't alone. Ash was there. And so was Emma. His daughter looked older, maybe 12. She stood with one hand on Ash's back, the other reaching toward Ethan. "It's okay, Dad," she said, her voice as warm as sunlight. "You don't have to be alone anymore." Ren let out a low, comforting growl. Ethan reached for Emma's hand. He awoke in tears, and peace. That summer, Ethan made the trip north one last time. Ash was nearly a year old, taller, stronger, his fur richer. But when he saw Ethan, he bounded forward with the same squealing joy. Ren emerged moments later, watching calmly as Ash nuzzled Ethan's coat and pawed at his boots. "You've grown," Ethan said, grinning. He sat by the edge of the enclosure for hours, telling them stories. About Scout. About Emma. About the river and the ridge and the sky. Ren eventually approached and pressed her forehead gently to the fence. It wasn't wild instinct. It was goodbye. This time, Ethan let himself cry. Not from sorrow, but from gratitude. Back at the cabin, Ethan carved again, a new sculpture. It showed Ren curled around two cubs. Behind her, a third one stood, a boy, his hand resting on her back. A golden retriever sat at his side. Above them, on a carved banner, he etched the words, "The family we choose is sometimes the one that finds us." Ethan no longer walked the woods alone. He carried Emma's memory in every step. He carried Ren's strength in every breath. And deep in the forest, where pawprints once marked the snow, a legacy had begun, one built on love, loss, and the healing only nature could provide. Today, hikers on Stillwater Ridge often speak of strange sightings, a large bear with wise eyes, always watching from a distance. They say she never threatens, never strays too close. They also say that sometimes, near dusk, a man can be seen sitting by an old barn, carving wood while a dog lies at his feet. They never speak. But somehow, they're never alone.